Assalamu alaikum. Greetings to the believers in our audience. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannibal Abdul Shakur. I'm here with Tanzim Doha and our beloved Amir Abdul Malik Ali. We're going to be continuing today our series in the Successors of Malcolm X. And within that, it's a continuation of our conversation on H. Rap Brown, the steadfast Imam Abdullah Amin. Imam Jamil Abdullah Amin. So last week we talked about the role he played within SNCC. We talked about some of the ways that different organizations came together and some of the details of that. Today we want to get more into his evolution and how he came to be the Imam that he is today, inshallah. So our first question, I'm gonna go ahead and ask Brother Amir. What were the circumstances that led to his conversion to Islam?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
You know, as we go through historical developments are very subtle. You could be in the midst of a historical development and not know that you are. Mm-hmm. And may not realize that you were in it until years later. I remember, without getting too personal, in high school, I had my black beret on. I'd wear my black beret to high school. And then about 7 years later, there was pictures of me in a kufi and a kifaya. Now, that represented a historical development that I personally didn't know that I was a part of. What started happening was that Black nationalists, one-time Black nationalists, Pan-African nationalists, whatever the case may be, began coming to Islam. And it wasn't just Black nationalists. It was Black nationalists, it was Arab nationalists, it was all types of nationalists that a development had occurred to where people were coming to Islam, particularly that branch of the Black liberation struggle that is sometimes called nationalistic, sometimes called revolutionary. And so that branch of the Black liberation struggle, Panthers, Black Liberation Army, Revolution Action Movement, RAM, that branch, just to name a few, that branch of the liberation struggle was influenced heavily by Malcolm. And so when Malcolm goes to Islam, we see him go to Islam and he talks about it and so on and so forth. What we didn't realize was that by Malcolm coming to the Quran and the Sunnah, that he was laying down an example for those of us from that branch of the liberation movement. He was laying down an example for us to follow. One of the things that happened to us is that we were in the struggle, we were in the movement. At the same time, we were very secular in our views. We weren't religious at all. And for many of us, we turned off to religion, not realizing that what we were doing was we were turning off to how religion was taught to us. We turned off to Jesus.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Uh-huh.
Say we have for example, say if we had someone in our audience maybe who's not religious at all.
Right.
How would you, coming away from that, how would you say is one way that you could say that your thinking was secular? You know what I mean? Because sometimes on the inside of something, we don't see it.
Right.
So how would you, when you say something like that, what do you mean by your thinking was very secular?
We were active in the movement. We were active in the struggle. We wanted to see unity of our people. We wanted to fight against racism. We wanted to establish self-determination. We wanted to do all of that, but it was not in the name of God. It was not in the name of God. God was not even in the equation. You know what I'm saying? So there wasn't a even a thinking on it being a higher power. And what is our relationship to that higher power? There was no thinking at all in that regard. And that's why for many of us, we saw Malcolm as being the highest leader, that there was no leader higher than Malcolm. But then Malcolm said that he followed a prophet, right? And so the Prophet Muhammad, of course, peace be upon him, I remember personally thinking, who's the Prophet Muhammad? You know what I'm saying? Because I'm reading Malcolm and I'm saying to myself, there's no other leader higher than this. This is the epitome of leadership. But he's saying that he followed someone. And so when he said that he followed someone, now when I'm focusing on Malcolm, it was only on Malcolm. It was only on Malcolm and him as a leader and him as a Black leader. You know what I'm saying? Human rights leader, so on and so forth. But I wasn't focusing on his spiritual side. And many people who were close to him said that he was a holy man. But I didn't see Malcolm as a holy man. I saw him as a political figure only. And so when he said that he followed someone, my first response is who's the Prophet Muhammad? You know what I'm saying? So Malcolm had so that's what I mean when I say secular, right? That God was not in the equation at all. We were doing some things that were righteous, we're trying to do some things that were righteous, you know what I'm saying? Caring about other people, being selfless, so on and so forth. We're trying to do things that were righteous. But again, it wasn't coming from the ideology, if I can use this term, it wasn't coming from the ideology of faith. Because for the spiritual warrior, the ideology is Iman. The ideology is faith. That's the ideology, right? So it wasn't coming from that ideology, right? And even after I had read the autobiography, after I became a Muslim, I started noticing his spiritual side. And I started noticing things in the autobiography that I never noticed before that were deeply, deeply spiritual. You know what I'm saying? And I never noticed it before. And so that's what I'm talking about. And so Malcolm, when he becomes a Muslim, he didn't come hard with it because he couldn't come hard with it. He came hard with the nation, which wasn't Islam. And so he of course, understandably had to come with a different approach, right? And so, but what it did though, it set something in motion that people started using Malcolm, like following Malcolm, not only in his political philosophy, but also in his spiritual philosophy. And so the Black liberation movement, soldiers, if you will, brothers and sisters, they started becoming Muslim. I didn't know this was going on, you know what I'm saying? But they started becoming Muslim. One of the best examples of that is what happened to H. Rap Brown. You know what I'm saying? One of the best examples of it. And word in the movement, I distinctly remember word in the movement spreading that H. Rap Brown's a Muslim now. H. Rap Brown's a Muslim. H. Rap Brown is a Muslim. I remember distinctly hearing that before I became a Muslim, that H. Rap Brown is a Muslim now. And so that's what was taking place. So now you had one-time Black Panthers becoming Muslim. You know, one time, as I said, BLA becoming Muslim. One-time Ram people becoming Muslim. And that was taking place, but it was also taking place on an international level. Like for example, in 1987, we got a chance to really see, and it came to the forefront that the Palestinian struggle had gone towards Islam. Now it was already building towards that, but we saw it manifest itself in 1987 with the rise of Hamas. And what that represented was Islam was taking the forefront in the struggle. So that's why I was saying earlier, not only was this happening with Black nationalists, it was happening with Arab nationalists too. And usually change like that is very subtle, right? And then then you start seeing examples of it. H. Rap Brown was a major example of that, right? And so he talked about when he was and he said, and let me say what he said about Malcolm. He said, in the struggle, we were familiar with Islam in different ways. because there was a lot of conversation in the media of Malcolm X, his odyssey from early life to being a Muslim when he died. He was a visible image, and I'm sure his conversion to true Islam had an impact on many different people. It made me look at Islam even more seriously than I would have. All right. So here is someone, and these are people who saw Malcolm, right? If we use the historical breakdown that the Prophet used, peace be upon him, it's very instructive when he said the best generation is my generation, the Sahaba. Then after them, the Tabi'in. Then after them, the Tabi'in. Well, that's an excellent way of breaking down historical continuity. Mm-hmm. So my generation would be Tabi'in, if you will, right? We never saw Malcolm. We never saw Malcolm. We were influenced by those. We were influenced by Malcolm's students, right? We were influenced by Malcolm's, if I can use this terminology, his companions, right? And nobody should walk away thinking I'm saying that Malcolm was a prophet. No, stuff a lot, right? I ain't saying that, right? I'm using the historical continuity framework that the Prophet gave us, peace be upon him. So Malcolm is the central figure. Imam Jamil and them, H. Rap Brown and Stokely and them, they saw Malcolm. Mm-hmm. They heard Malcolm. They listened to Malcolm, right? They saw him, right? And so here is someone from that generation who saw Malcolm, who is saying that as a result of Malcolm coming to true Islam, it made us look at Islam more deeply, more deeply than we would have. So Malcolm was there. Malcolm was playing a role in his conversion. You know what I'm saying? It made him as well as his peers. It made them look at Islam more. Because Malcolm, see, it's really critical that we are still an African people. We're an African people. So while we are struggling for our liberation, as an African people, African psychology, African culture, the African worldview, the spiritual is the highest. The spiritual is the highest. Now for the European, the material is the highest, right? That's where it comes, dialectical materialism, right? Capitalism, doctrine of belief based on capital, right? Material. Their God has become material. Money, Jesus, their God has to be material. So for the European mindset, the highest level is the material. For the African mindset, the highest level is the spiritual. So the fact that we were involved in a liberation struggle, coming from a secular point of view, but feeling that, no, there's something missing. There's something missing. And we realized that it was the spiritual that was missing. That was our African coming out. You know what I'm saying? That was our Eastern flavor coming out, right? So you had some hardcore brothers and sisters who were involved in the Black liberation struggle who realized, no, we got to do a spiritual thing. There's got to be a spirit. It's got to be rooted in spirituality. Exactly. Because we're an African people. We just got turned off to religion in general because of Christianity and how Christianity was presented to us. So that made us turn off to religion in general, made us turn off to Jesus, peace be upon him, in general. But when Malcolm made that move, you know what I'm saying? It made many look at Islam, us included, right? It made us look at Islam deeper because Malcolm made that move and he wasn't no punk. You know what I'm saying? So that means he was telling us that there is a spiritual path that will accommodate our militancy. Mm-hmm. There's a spiritual path that will accommodate our energy and our fire, and it's a spiritual path. We do not have to get rid of our spiritual side, you know what I'm saying, to accommodate this fire that we have for justice. That path is Islam, right? And so Malcolm laid that out. So now here is H. Rap Brown in prison now. They were going up against the drug dealers. And so they were attacking drug dealers because, of course, the drug dealers were used to destroy the movement, right? And so there was a shootout at a bar that was a drug den. And so he ends up getting involved in the shootout also with police. He's shot and he's taken into custody. And then he's
as a Panther, we're talking about.
Yes, this is H. Rap Brown. There was a situation where even some of the movies picked up on it. Like for example, Superfly. There was a scene in Superfly where the militants was going up against Superfly, was going up against the drug dealers. And so that was a phenomena that was really taking place, right? The militants saw that the drug dealers being used by the system to destroy the movement. And so the militants said, okay, we going after y'all then. We going after y'all then, you know what I'm saying? And so it was that type of dynamic, you know. Now, some of these drug dealers eventually became Muslims, Abdullah, you know what I'm saying? But at that particular time, though, you know what I'm saying, it was like, it was conflict. Yeah. And so H. Rap Brown was involved in that as well, you know what I'm saying? And so, and keep in mind too, when H. Rap Brown and Stokely and them came out to Oakland and they all joined forces, that coalition only lasted for 4 months. Right. It only lasted for about 4 months, right? COINTELPRO, by the time COINTELPRO got finished with it, you know what I'm saying? Straight up disunity, distrust, and so on and so forth. But yeah, but this was when he was still H. Rap Brown. And so now he's in prison. So now he comes into contact with probably the most significant Islamic movement among African Americans to date, the Dar el-Islam movement. The Dar el-Islam movement had a history with the State Street Masjid of Sheikh Dawood. The brothers from the Dar were some of the brothers who actually helped provide security for Malcolm when he came to Quran and Sunnah. And so the Dar started having, it was made up a lot of brothers who were in Vietnam, made up brothers who used to be Panthers, and so on and so forth, from the Black liberation struggle. So the Dar was a serious Islamic movement. Like I said, I think it's the most significant Islamic movement among African American Muslims to date. That's just an opinion. But when you go to the East Coast to this day, and you go to places like Philly and such, and you hear the Adhan being called, the Dar started that. The Dar started that, or the Jawala Scouts, the Muslim Boy Scouts, Jawala Scouts. The Dar started that, right? These are institutions that are still around and practices that are still around. So the Dar used to go into the prisons, Riker Island, so on and so forth, because the base of it was New York City. And so the Dar used to go into the prisons and they did dawah. They specifically, of course, heard that H. Rap Brown was locked up, and they went to him and they invited him to Juma, right? Dawah, invitation, right? So he came, he came. And let me share just a couple statements from him. According to Brother Jamil, becoming a Muslim was no more than a, quote, continuation of a lifestyle. We talked about that last week, right? It's a continuation of a lifestyle. What are we doing? We trying to establish justice. We're trying to build unity, right? We trying to, like, the lifestyle that we had in the movement was a righteous lifestyle. It was a righteous lifestyle. Now, some of us are still getting high and so on and so forth, maybe chasing cutie pies and stuff like that. But in terms of the general aspect of it, we were selfless. We're thinking about other people. We're thinking about ways that we can serve our people. You know what I'm saying? So when he says it was a continuation of a lifestyle, yeah, a lifestyle of struggle. And in Islam, at the core of Islam is jihad, which of course doesn't mean holy war. It means struggle. We're taught by Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that at the core of our life is struggle. You gotta struggle to be righteous. You gotta struggle to be a good person. You gotta struggle to have a good marriage, a strong marriage. I mean, you gotta struggle to go from a Muslim to a mu'min. That's a struggle. So all of this is struggle. And so we were living a life of struggle. So he says it's a continuation of a lifestyle. You see, most people don't have a true picture of what Islam is. Islam is not nonviolent. There's a right to self-defense, and there is a right to defend your faith. Allah says that fighting is prescribed for you. Fighting tyranny and oppression, for tyranny and oppression are worse than slaughter. So fight them wherever you find them. It became evident that to accomplish the things we had talked about in the struggle, you would need a practice, or he would say a program, right? But he said you would need a practice. Allah says He does not change the condition of a people until they change that which is in themselves. That is what Islam does, and it points out right from wrong. It points out truth from falsehood. So he's saying that, yeah, that this was just a continuation. But then he also said that when he would go to Juma, he would critically analyze, he would critique what he was hearing.
Mm.
And he would literally say, in his own words, he would say, okay, what's wrong with that? And he'd analyze it. Because you know Imam Jamil, right? H-Rat, right? He analyzed it, right? And so, okay, what's wrong with that? Okay, what's wrong with that? Okay, what's wrong with that? That's how he was processing it. And then what he noticed is that the answer would always be nothing. You know what I'm saying? Ain't nothing wrong with that. Ain't nothing wrong with that. So now he's taking all this in and realizing that like this is the prescription for true social change. Because what he had realized is something that alhamdulillah Allah allowed us to realize. And that is, and I can't say this enough, that because we were following the same morals as our enemy, the same lifestyle as our enemy, the same culture as our enemy, we were actually imitating our enemy. We were imitating what we thought we were fighting against. We were imitating it. You know what I'm saying? And so that was a huge, realization, right? A mercy from Allah. Well, he realized that. He realized that. You know what I'm saying? That we're following his culture, we're following his morals, we're following his ethics. We're following his ethics, right? How can we beat him if we're imitating him, right? And so now what he realizes is that this program of social change right here, this is it right here. This is it. And then H-Rap Brown becomes a Muslim.
Amir, can I ask you a question that's kind of related to what you were discussing about Darul Islam?
Yes.
I read that Darul Islam's ideology, a lot of it was a huge influence of Maulana Maududi's work and his philosophy and so on. And in contemporary times, a lot of not all, but some of the Sufi Muslims tend to be highly critical of figures like Maududi and Said Qutb and their influence on former Black nationalists who've become Muslim. And the Sufi tendency wants to really criticize Maududi's work by calling it modernist and so on and so forth. And how do you respond to that criticism? I have a criticism of that, but I'd like to hear from you. How do you respond to that?
I think that the Dar was influenced more by the Ikhwan. But the Ikhwan was very close to Jamaat Islami of Maududi. If we remember Sayyid Qutb's trial, a question that was asked to him in the trial, you'll see this in the transcript. Maududi was accused of trying to form a revolution. The evidence that was used by the government was milestones. And then one of the questions he was asked is, how close is this to the beliefs and ideas of the Jamaat Islami of Pakistan? And Sayyid Qutb made a statement very close, very close, right? And so now also keep in mind too that in Washington, D.C., there was a group called the Islamic Party, right? Which is like Jamaat Islami, right? But it's called the Islamic Party. And they were directly influenced by Maududi. Directly influenced by Maududi. When Maududi came here for medical treatment, he told the people with him, get with the African Americans. You know what I'm saying? And so one of the things that came out of that was the Islamic Party that was based in Washington, D.C. I think that the Dar was more influenced by Sayyid Qutb. But these two strains, if you will, the Ikhwan and Jamaat Islami, were very, very influential in the African American Islamic tradition. They were very influential. You cannot, you know what I'm saying? I mean, the masjid I took Shahada in East Oakland was called Masjid Maududi. You know what I'm saying? And so at that time, and so these two Islamic movements had a major influence and impact on the African American Islamic tradition. All right. And so there is now the Dar. The Dar has a complete system. They're all in the East Coast, chapters in the Caribbean, in the Midwest, in the South, you know what I'm saying? And so this was very, very serious, very, very serious. And so these brothers, as I said, they had an influence on Imam Jamil. Now, when the Dar was destroyed, when the Dar was destroyed in the early 80s, and this is, I'm getting back to your question here. The Dar was destroyed by a Sufi sheikh. Okay. And so when that happened, that's how many of us knew that the next trend that was going to be used on Muslims was going to be the Sufi sheikh. It was tried on us first. You know what I'm saying? And so so now keep in mind, when the Sufis talk about Sayyid Qutb and so on and so forth, the Sufis, I want to say this as gently as possible. Yeah. The Sufis are backed by the West. They're backed by the enemies of Islam. The enemies of Islam prefer the Sufis. They said in their documents,
the RAND document,
the RAND report, promote Sufism.
Yeah.
Promote Sufism. All right. Because what Sufism does, it focuses on, internal purification and fighting against the internal evil that we have within ourselves, but not fighting against the evil found in society. It's not talking about that. You know what I'm saying? And going up against, spiritual wickedness in high and low places, as our Christian brothers say. You know what I'm saying? They're not talking about that. They're not talking about engaging the society. Now, in Tasawwuf, and I make a differentiation between Tasawwuf and Sufism. When I think of Tasawwuf, I think about like Uthman Dan Fodio. You know what I'm saying? I think about the tariqas who were involved. Muhammad Ahmed of Sudan, the so-called Mahdi. They all practiced Tasawwuf. And then those movements, of course, in Asia and so on and so forth, they practiced Tasawwuf, but they fought against the evil within and the evil without. And that evil without many times dealt with colonialism, against imperialism. You know what I'm saying? So they were fighting on both fronts. The Sufis fight on just one front, the internal, and that's all. So so they have been basically trained to go after those Muslims, to denigrate those Muslims who are fighting the evil on the outside, who are going up against the enemies of Islam.
Here, not to interrupt, but I remember long time ago you gave a khutbah in which you almost gave us like an architectural model of the development of jihad internally, internal struggle, like the base foundation, and then the highest level, like building. And would you mind sharing that information with our viewers, because a lot of people don't know, because what people often do, particularly those who are Sufi influenced, they wait for their internal purification for a long time before they want to commit. Like if I ask a brother, hey brother, let's struggle, we got something going on in such and such place, let's go and do something, right? They will like, well, I got to work on myself for a number of years. And a lot of the Sufi influenced so-called scholars say, they give arguments that, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam waited so many years before he did certain things, and as a result, you have to wait so many years to purify yourself before you can even do fighting, etc. I always understood it from my teachers, even back home, people are influenced by Maududi and others, that it is always simultaneously happening. You develop yourself and when you actually engage in struggle, your self-development improves as well. There's a connection there.
And I think we should keep in mind too, if that was the case, then how the Quran was structured, right? Now, if it was an issue of wait until you get to a certain point and then you go ahead and do this, right? Then I think the Quran would have been structured in a way where the earliest surahs would have came first. The earliest surahs would have came first. The Meccan surahs would have came first then, right? But what surahs come first? Medina surahs come first.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so so I think it's really a cop-out in terms of what they're doing. Now, there are two hadith which the Prophet, peace be upon him, said the most important jihad and the highest jihad. And sometimes we get those mixed up. And sometimes the Sufi brothers will focus on the hadith where he says the most important jihad. Okay, jihad against the nafs. That's true. Very, very true. Very, very true, right? But when he said this hadith, they were coming from the battlefield. They were coming from the battlefield. You know what I'm saying? So it wasn't a situation of, no, don't go to the battlefield until you fight this jihad within yourself. No, they were coming from the battlefield.
Right.
When he said, now you got to deal with the most important jihad, right? He didn't tell them not to go to the battlefield again. Right. He didn't tell them he didn't say that. They were coming from the battlefield. And then he said he wants them to keep it in perspective, right? Because remember, you got to fight on both fronts, right? The most important one is this one within, right? So so the Sufi brothers would focus on that at the expense of jihad on the outside, the battlefield, if you will. Whether it's an ideological battlefield, physical battlefield, whatever battlefield, they will totally turn their back on the external battlefield. Now, what we were talking about is if you had a building with 3 floors, the most important floor is the first floor because it's holding the second and third floor. So the most important floor is the first floor. The highest floor is the third floor. The highest floor is the third floor, but the most important floor is the first floor. All right. So in the question of jihad, fi sabilillah, the most important one is jihad against the evil self within. The highest one is the jihad against evil outside and the establishment of Islam, establishment of the Islamic system, right? And fighting against those forces that try to hamper our efforts to develop the Islamic system. That's the highest one, because if someone is killed doing that right there, they reach martyrdom to the highest level. That's the highest level of martyrdom. You see what I'm saying? And so both of those are necessary. Both are necessary. Remember we talked about last week, both, right? Where they're coming from either or. And the prophets, Rasulullah in particular, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was never either or proposition. It's not an either or proposition. It's both. It's both. So by our Sufi brothers taking a more Western approach, and separating those components, separating them, saying either or, right? And then almost like verses, like contention. You know what I'm saying? It's a Western view. It's a Western view. At the root of it is Western thought. On the outside, though, is you see rituals and so on and so forth. But one of the manifestations of the Western part of it, though, is that there's an emphasis on numbers. Do this 10,000 times. Do this 5,000 times. Do this 3,000 times. Do this 100 times. Do this now. Okay, but
a lot of innovation.
Yeah, once you start focusing on the numbers that you do something, you know what I'm saying? The numbers, and some of them are rooted in hadith. Yeah. But once you start focusing on the numbers, the quantity, then you get away from the quality. You know what I'm saying? And so now, but on the flip side, though, those brothers who put more emphasis on the external struggle, there was a tendency for us to put so much tendency on the external struggle that we forgot the internal struggle. We went the other end of the spectrum, right? So now we have to look at those people, beginning with the Prophet, peace be upon him, Islam, beginning with the companions, right? And work our way up to those contemporary figures who did it on both fronts, the internal and the external, both fronts. So that's why I think Sufism, like I said, as opposed to Tasawwuf, that's why I think Sufism is favored more by the West. You know what I'm saying? Than any tendencies in Islam. It's Sufism that's favored. And as we said earlier, they said it in the Rand report, promote Sufism. So a lot of times too, people who won't stand up will come at people who do stand up. You know what I'm saying? And because of their inability or unwillingness to stand up, to speak truth to power, because of their fear, what they'll do is they will use that energy to come at people who are standing up and who are speaking truth to power. It has no credibility whatsoever because they're not doing it. They're not saying, for example, it's one thing to put somebody down for for standing up, speaking truth to power, but you're also doing something though. You're doing something. So you may disagree with that, but you are doing something. Like you're doing something, you know, that's really important, significant, so on and so forth, right? But it's another thing to come at people standing up, speaking truth to power, and you're not doing anything. You're not making any type of contribution.
Brother Amir,
yes.
How did that play out in the Dar movement?
The Sufi sheikh made a couple of people, and particularly some of the leaders, think that he could perform miracles.
Wow. Who
his name was Sheikh Jelani. And he now remember the Dar, these were brothers and sisters who were expert at doing dawah in the cities and in the inner cities in particular, New York, Philly, so on and so forth. And so some of the OGs tell us that there was a retreat that was a retreat. They had a retreat, and some of the Dar leaders went to that retreat, and some of them came back believing that they should follow Sheikh Jelani. Not all the leaders, but some of them came back, major leaders. It calls a major split. And Sheikh Jelani took them out of New York, out of the East Coast, and went to Colorado, and went up in the hills of Colorado. So now you had these brothers and sisters who were very skilled at doing dawah in the inner city, in the cities, and you're taking them up in the hills and the mountains. So there was a major split within the Dar, a major split within the Dar. And so in my mind, that was the beginning of the tendency to use the Sufi sheikh against the Muslims, against the activism, against the Islamic movement, the cause of Allah, and so on and so forth. That was the beginning of it. And then we started seeing it more and more. I don't know if sometimes you'll hear us, we'll talk about, we'll give an example of corrupt religious leaders. And for corrupt Christian leaders, we'll say Reverend Pope Chop, right? Mm-hmm. And for corrupt Muslim leaders, we'll say Sheikh Levitate. Sheikh Levitate. Sheikh Levitate. No, because some of these sheikhs were given the impression that they could perform miracles, right? And some were even saying like they could levitate and so on and so forth. You know what I'm saying? And so that. Go ahead.
Even now, sometimes you hear, because I constantly search, for information. So I go through videos online, YouTube, etc. And sometimes you'll come across things, and apparently it's a really big tradition even now that people believe that certain sheikhs were doing a lot of different kinds of miracles. And I don't want to pick on them and focus on anything specific.
Right, exactly. But see, here's the and we'll get back to, because this really we'll get back to the Dar and how this relates to Imam Jamil, inshallah, because there's a major relationship there. So one of the things that we have to be careful of is the tendency for the enemies of Islam to subtly get away from practicing Islam in the way that the Prophet did it, and the companions did it. There was never a term for sheikh. There was never, ever. The only way that sheikh was used in the Quran was for old man. It was never, ever used as a designation of a leadership title, ever. The Sahaba didn't do it. The Tabi'in didn't do it. The Tabi'in didn't do it. It's not in the Quran. It's not in the Sunnah that a title, that one of the titles of a leadership title would be a sheikh. Never was that ever used. That's one of the reasons why I make fun of the title. You know what I'm saying? I say sheikh, that kind of stuff. But I'm only doing that to making a statement. This was never used. Mm-hmm. This title, this term as a title of leadership was never used in our Islamic traditions. And so we have to, just like Sufism, Sufism is not a part of our Islamic tradition. So they understand that our enemies understand that Islam is here to stay. So they know that the only thing we can do is to try to get them to practice it in the way that the Prophet didn't practice it. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Practice it in the way that the companions did not practice it. That's their main thing. So the whole concept of sheikh is a part of that tradition. Get them to practice it in the way that the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the companions did not practice it. You know what I'm saying? And that's why they could use that type of thing and use it for that purpose. All right. So the Dar is split up. Major trauma. So the Dar is split up. And then, and incidentally, real aside, remember how the Muslims came together? SNCC and Panthers came together in Oakland, 1967?
Yeah.
The Muslims did that in Philly in 1971. The Dar, the Islamic Party, and the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood, Imam Talib, the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood, all came together under one in Philly in 1971. So the same thing happened in Islam, in the African American Islamic movement and tradition. Same thing happened. So now the Dar is split up. It's broken up. The Dar also had a serious paramilitary called the Rad, the Thunder, right? Serious. And so the Dar splits up. Now check this out. The brothers in the Dar, obviously, when Imam Jamil, when H. Rap Brown becomes a Muslim, 71. The Dar is split up in 1980, 81. Turmoil. The brothers in the Dar go to Imam Jamil and gives him bay'ah. Imam Jamil inherited the Dar. And by them doing that, now there are brothers in the Dar who had more Islamic, experience than Imam Jamil. But it's because of what Imam Jamil represented. And of course, his intellect, of course, his insight, of course. But so by them going to Imam Jamil and saying, we will take bay'ah to you, that was major. That was major. And so now here's H. Rap Brown, Imam Jamil, and he becomes the Amir of the most significant African-American Islamic movement to date. And so, of course, the government is looking at that. Now, the government, remember, is seeing the fact that there's an Islamic revival taking place. 1979, revolution in Iran. 1982, rise of Hezbollah in Lebanon. 1984, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. 1987, the rise of Hamas. They see that there's an Islamic revival taking place. And also in all these other Muslim countries, there's revival. The people are coming back to Islam, like we were saying earlier. The people are coming back to Islam. They're seeing all of this, late 70s and the 80s. So of course, 1990, 91, the Gulf War. The excuse to get as much weapons to the Middle East as possible, so-called Middle East. Get weapons there. Use Saddam Hussein as the excuse, right? And then after that, all these things started happening. You know what I'm saying? The books, Jihad in America, the movies, documentaries, all this stuff started happening. Siege with Denzel Washington and all this stuff started happening now, right? So they see that there's an Islamic revival. Now, how are they going to respond, brothers, when they see that one of the people who they felt would be the Messiah, Stokely, King, H. Rap Brown, one of the people who they thought would have been the Black Messiah is now a Muslim. And the original Black Messiah in their mind was black, male, and Muslim, Malcolm. So now here is a brother influenced by Malcolm, comes out of the black liberation struggle. He's a Muslim now. And he inherits the most significant African-American Islamic group to date. He inherits that movement. Come on now. They can do math. They can do math. You know, they see with all that. And then look what's happening internationally. You know what I'm saying? So Imam Jamil was, they didn't stop doing surveillance on Imam Jamil. They didn't stop. Now, as far as they're concerned, he's even more dangerous, right? And so, yeah, all these things are taking place. Somebody text the Grenada Revolution, so on and so forth. Exactly. Anti-apartheid. That's right. The early 80s was a mini 60s. The early 80s was a mini 60s. We had our own Trump. For those of you who are chatting, we had our own Trump was Ronald Reagan. Mm-hmm. Ronald Reagan was announcing that he was going to assassinate leaders. He was announcing it. You know, back in the day, in the 60s, you had to look for the documents and all that kind. Ronald Reagan was announcing that he was sending planes to kill Gaddafi. He had assassinated Maurice Bishop in Grenada and so on and so forth, right? Malcolm's mother, I think, was from Grenada. And so there was so much stuff happening at that time. Somebody put up the anti-apartheid movement. There was so much happening at that time. That's why we call it a mini 60s, right? And again, my generation, the children of the 60s, we were in our 20s. So of course we were getting busy. We were getting busy, right? And so now, what? One of the things that emerges out of this, H. Rap Brown becomes a Muslim, and look at how significant this was. He was what I call the third wave, and what I mean by that is that Farrakhan was spitting fire, but it wasn't Islam. It wasn't Islam, right? Imam Warif Deen was coming from Quran and Sunnah, but he was taking a pro-American approach. Mm-hmm. So look at the confusion that's out there. Right. Farrakhan is spitting fire, but it's not Quran and Sunnah. Imam Warif Deen is coming from Quran and Sunnah, but it's God bless America. Right. All right? Rahim Allah. You know, may Allah have mercy on him. And so there's confusion. Who was the third wave? The third wave was Imam Jamil. Mm-hmm. Quran and Sunnah, and he's bringing it, as we see with the book, Revolution by the Book, right? Like he's Quran and Sunnah, and he's bringing it. So Imam Jamil becomes a major threat, a major threat.
I wanna ask another question, inshallah. And I feel, and I mean, I think it's kind of continuing in the vein what you're just saying too. Yeah. What does Imam Jamil say about the Islamic lifestyle?
We should all read on Revolution by the Book yesterday. Have book clubs on it. Have some discussions on it. Because and this is why Imam Jamil is extremely significant. And I appreciate you guys. What did you call it? The children of Malcolm? What did you call it? The Successors of Malcolm. Because this is Imam Jamil. Malcolm, one of the things that Malcolm starts doing, but remember, he only had 11 months and 13 days to live. After he announced his break, he had 11 months and 13 days to live. Out of the country, almost 6 months. But Malcolm is slowly tying into, like he's tying Islam into our liberation. How Islam, how it assists us, how it can be a weapon and a help in the liberation of our people. But Malcolm only got so far doing that. He only got so far. Imam Jamil writes a book, Revolution by the Book. And in general, what that book is dealing with is how the 5 pillars of Islam aid us in our liberation. Like Imam Jamil is even more explicit as to how Islam fits into our liberation, how we can use Islam as a means to our liberation as a people. You know what I'm saying? And that's why Imam Jamil was a successor. He was his successor. You know what I'm saying? Because now he got even further in teaching us how Islam works in our liberation. And so that's why that book is so critical. revolution by the book, revolution according to revelation, revolution according to what Allah, the prescription that Allah gives us for social change. You know what I'm saying? That it's a spiritual program, that we have to have a spiritual program, right? Revolution by the book, by the Quran, right? And so now what Imam Jamil is presenting to us as a people is another means to for our liberation, right? Another a prescription for social change. And he's saying it's spiritual in nature. It's Islam.
And he's also saying something about, Islam has an effectiveness in solving some of the mistakes they made in the 60s, right?
Yes, without a doubt, and particularly of course, when he said taking the struggle to a higher level, take it to a higher level. And what many of us get out of that is that, and back when you were asking about the secular thing, we didn't see our activism as an act of worship.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't see it as an act of worship. It had nothing to do with worship. And what he was saying is that taking it to a higher level as an act of worship. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And now, since our activism becomes an act of worship, now the way we interact with that activism is totally different now. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? There's no room for drugs. Mm-hmm. There's no room for drugs, right? We need to get married. We need to build families. We need to, like, it gave us a whole different program for struggle and revolution. It's like one of the things that happened too in the 60s, and to a certain extent in the 60s and early 70s, and certain extent in the 80s, was that brothers would just be in the movement and just be until their bodies gave up. Mm-hmm. Till their bodies gave up. Absolutely. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that Islam talks about, of course, is that and the Sunnah, no, we have to be in shape. Mm-hmm. We have to get in shape. We have to, like, that's a major part of what this whole thing is about. You know what I'm saying? And so he presented Islam as I remember he used this term when he came out here in the early 80s into Oakland. He said, Islam is a program of conditioning. We need a program of conditioning that prepares us for struggle. He said it's not enough to fight. We want to win, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's got to be a conditioning program. And so he was saying that this conditioning program will help us develop a different set of morals, different set of ethics that are different from the enemy of Islam, a different lifestyle from the enemies of Islam, a different lifestyle. You know what I'm saying? And so that's what was very, very critical about it. And then you start seeing things, you know, how we've talked about how the fact that the government said prevent the rise of a Messiah, a spiritual term, right? You know, that type of thing, right? And so Imam Jamil began to give us another basis of how to struggle, and that was within the confines of Islam. I remember he said, where's that at? He said this. Let me read this real quick, inshallah. He says, Allah has showed me to understand. Allah has allowed me to understand that it is not race or color that is the issue. The only important thing is the word of Allah. Since Islam, I understand that truth is not relative. Truth is universal. There is no God but Allah. It is the truth on which the whole universe rests, and nothing changes that. He's coming from a whole different perspective now. And that reminded me of Sayyid Qutb in Milestones, right? When Sayyid Qutb was saying that, basically Sayyid Qutb was saying the root of the problem is not race. The root of the problem is not class. The root of the problem is belief and non-belief. Mm-hmm. The root of the problem is tawheed and shirk. You know what I'm saying? He's letting us know like what the root of the problem is. Now we have to deal with racial issues. We have to deal with issues of race. We have to deal with issues of class, but that's not the root. Mm-hmm. That's not the root. It goes deeper.
Can I ask a question? Please. This also comes from, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years ago in a khutbah. That again, you were giving khutbah on 82nd, and you were saying that in the nationalist days, a lot of your generation thought of the struggle as rebelling against the white man. Yes. And you said once you got into Islam, you realized that the white man was the rebel against God. So that connects that whole spiritual level, that the whole idea of race is about the white man thinking of himself,
Yes.
rebelling against God himself.
And you know,
Yes.
And
Yes.
we're fighting against that disobedience
Yes.
of white man, and
Yes.
as a result, them creating a world which
Yes.
is about disobedience to Allah.
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
and I want to
Yeah.
kind of jump in there too, because one thing that's you know, registering in my mind as you're talking through these points is that you know, what we're typically presented as, you know, the 60s and the Black Power movement is sort of like, you know, what they were into in terms of that spirit of rebellion and kind of like a generalized like leftist kind of
Right.
ideology, politics, etc. Right, and that was what you know, that was what they used to organize themselves as very young people.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
as kids, teenagers, very young.
Yes. Exactly.
But those
Exactly.
people who stayed in the struggle and who continued to struggle and evolve through those stages as they got older, we find that you know, as their consciousness matured and their struggle matured,
Yes.
find them embracing Islam,
Yes.
which I
Yes.
thought was really interesting.
And Allah really takes care of the sincere. He takes care of those who are sincere. You know what I'm saying? And getting back to the original point, that's exactly it. It's like when we saw ourselves as rebels, it was in relationship to the white man. It was in relationship to the system. So we were actually putting the system first. There's the white man, there's the system, and my relationship to them is that I'm a rebel. I was putting them first. Whatever you put first, that's your God. Whatever you put first, that's your God. And so when I say that we were worshiping what we thought we were fighting against, I mean that literally. Whatever you put first, that's your God. And so once we put something else first, el awal, the first, once we put Allah first. Now, what is my relationship to Allah? My relationship to Allah is that I'm in a state of submission, not rebellion. His relationship to Allah is that he's in a state of rebellion. Oh, like you said, you the rebel. You the rebel. So what we're trying to do is quash a rebellion. You know what I'm saying? We're trying to quash a rebellion, man. You know what I'm saying? We have a branch of the human family who has rebelled.
Right.
We have a branch of the human family who has rebelled against our creator.
Right.
And this branch,
Law and order.
Huh?
I said, we're trying to establish law and order.
We trying to establish law and order. You know what I'm saying? We're conservatives.
You know?
We're trying to take it back to what it was. But you know, but see, that angle is very, very critical.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? In essence, we're trying to squash a rebellion.
But when you really think about it, and this is something that we talked about before, when you really think about it, this society, it really means disorder. It means lawlessness and disorder for the people who don't have the golden ticket.
Yes.
Before, you can get preyed upon by any kind of violence.
Right.
You get exploited for your labor. You have to live in difficult conditions. And that's disorder. That's not law and order.
Right.
And so sometimes, you know, people might not understand, like if we talk about law and order, we mean real order. And
exactly.
Is peace. God. You know,
exactly.
It's the
justice.
Harmony when we're all in doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Finding that, you know.
Exactly. When everything is given their due right, you have order. Right. When everything is given its due right, you have order, you have justice. Justice is a part of order. You know what I'm saying? Balance, mizan, that balance. You know what I'm saying? And so Islam gives us a whole different perspective to come from, to come out of. And that's true revolution. That's true revolution. And our enemies know that. Our enemies know that. Our enemies know that is true revolution, because we have that is not coming from us. That is not coming from us. But anytime you have a system where it's all about man's laws, and as opposed to the laws of Allah, you're going to have disorder, because anything goes with man's laws. 1 minute we're allowed to eat, we're allowed to drink alcohol. Next minute we're not allowed to drink alcohol. Next minute we are allowed to drink alcohol. Is disorder. It's disorder. You know, man is coming up with so many different things. That's where the disorder lies. It's his whims, his own whims, his own likes and dislikes, and so on and so forth. You know, so yeah, but see, this is the perspective that Islam helps us to come from. It comes from that perspective.
It's sort of like the pleasure principle, right? Like whatever feels good,
yes,
that becomes law. Whatever feels good for the powerful or the rebel, you know, that becomes the rebel against God. That becomes the law. So would you mind sharing with us a little bit about how Imam Jamil, in particular, Malcolm X as well, and how this tradition of Islamic revival looks at pleasure and desire differently than conventionally how it's looked at, how we do things for the pleasure of Allah was very different than, you know, pleasure of the self, let's say.
And see, as you alluded to, that's the key for them. The focus on the individual. The focus on the individual. That's the socialization process of the West. Focusing on the individual. Me, I. My rights. And so what that does is that fuels the ego. It fuels the ego. Now this same personality is not recognizing a higher power and not bowing down to a higher power. So now, as it feeds the ego, it's going to feed arrogance. We're going to be arrogant. We're going to be selfish. We're going to be arrogant. We're going to be self-centered. That's what it produces. Even when we're trying to be good people, you know what I'm saying? It's like if we're not recognizing and bowing down to a higher power than us, we have to be arrogant.
Right.
It comes with the territory. Then what's also a part of that socialization process is ingratitude. Ingratitude. You know what I'm saying? Wherever you find arrogance, you'll find ingratitude. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why in Quran, Allah makes ingratitude synonymous with kufr.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? We're ungrateful. If you're walking around here making people think that you're God, and Allah is the one who put you in authority in terms of the Khalifa. He put you in authority. He put us in authority as human beings. He put us in authority, and we're going to turn around and tell human beings, I'm God? You know, how ungrateful is that? And you're going to use all of your expertise, your knowledge, to keep people away from God, to get people to deny God, to deny the one who created us. That's ungrateful. That's ungrateful. And what did Iblis say to Allah? Truly, you will find most of them ungrateful. You gave them this status. Most of them are going to be ungrateful to you, right? And then Allah says in another place, oh man, what has seduced you away from your Lord? You know what? Why have you gone away from your Lord like this? You know what I'm saying? And so all these types of things. So it produces a personality that is really unhealthy. Unhealthy. So even when we came to Islam, and by the grace of Allah, and we look back on our activism days and we say, dang, he's unhealthy. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we thought we was on it. You know what I'm saying? But it's like, man, you know, we still had his culture. So we had dirty thoughts, we had unclean ideas, we had, you know, it's like, you know, and some of our behavior was not, you know, was not as clean as it should have been. It's like, man. So from that aspect there, but Malcolm, and what they said when Malcolm would walk into a room, they said Malcolm had a moral presence. He had a moral presence. You know what I'm saying? That you know, that type of thing, right? So it wasn't just his political, his morality, women trying to get with him and so on and so forth, and he kicking them to the curb and all these types of things, right? And so Malcolm, and then of course then Imam Jamil, they bring us all just a whole different program, man. Tazkiyah, a program of purification whereby we're able to, just like grass, weeds. If too many weeds, the grass can't grow. Too many weeds. This system puts so many weeds in our personality. Even those of us trying to do right, we had a lot of weeds in our personality. And we had to uproot those weeds in order for us to truly make progress. So what Islam does, and what these brothers showed us, that Islam, by practicing Islam, we can uproot these weeds, this corruption that he put into our personalities that's hampering our growth. And now we get rid of those weeds, and now we can really blossom. But for those of us who tried to do good back then, though, What did the Prophet say, peace be upon him? The best of you in the Jahiliyyah will be the best of you in Islam.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? So even though there were our hearts, inshallah, was in the right place. You know what I'm saying? We were doing a good thing though.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? We're doing like if you hung out with us, you know, you better be about something.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You better be woke. You better be into something that has to do with liberating your people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we ain't gonna be sitting around just talking about sex. We ain't gonna be just sitting around and, you know what I'm saying? Like, so we were doing something like worthwhile and important. You know what I'm saying? But there were still weeds there. There were still weeds. And there were those who, like in COINTELPRO, COINTELPRO helped exploit those weeds.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? COINTELPRO would look at our personalities and they would look at the weeds and they would exploit those weeds to the point to where our whole personality became dominated by the weeds, by the immorality, by the unethical behaviors and so on and so forth. You know what I'm saying? These brothers laid down a whole different way of how to roll. Now, does that mean that we're not going to make mistakes? No, we're still going to make mistakes. Of course, we're going to make mistakes, of course. But the way we deal with those mistakes is going to be different. It's going to be different. You know what I'm saying? Seeking forgiveness from Allah, making tawbah, you know what I'm saying? Asking forgiveness of those we, you know, offended or whatever the case may be. It's like once you become more God conscious, you become morally conscious. That was a problem too. We weren't God conscious. There's no way you could be intensely morally conscious if you're not God conscious. And we were doing some morally upright things.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not God conscious, then morality is not in front of your face.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And so, again, these brothers set this tone by becoming more God conscious.
Mm-hmm.
Now we become more morally conscious. We're more morally conscious in spite of our mistakes and things. And so this was true liberation, revolution by the book. You know what I'm saying? And Imam Jamil was basically saying, this is the only true revolution. This is the only true change. Revolution is not 360. Revolution is 180. You know what I'm saying? You got to go totally opposite of what, you know, in terms of, you know, what you were doing, how you were thinking. You have to go totally opposite of that, from the material to the spiritual, you know, rooted in the spiritual.
I got another question too, inshallah. What are we losing by having our beloved imams sitting in a dungeon? Like, thinking about everything you just said, you know, I can't help but imagine, like, what would we be like as a community? What would our society be like if he wasn't languishing in a dungeon?
Yeah. I think we would be, Allahu Alam, but with all human certainty, we would be at a higher stage of our development. Remember how we talk about the bottom line for us in this society, anyone, but in this society is self-determination. You know what I'm saying? I think we'd be further along in our pursuit to self-determination, because these kind of people have such an insight into struggle, the nature of struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Their insight is just a piercing insight into the nature of struggle, that it would really advance us. It would really advance us. And then the other aspect of influence. These kind of people will help us take our influence to a higher level, right? Imam Jamil was on death row. Mm-hmm. He was on death row in Georgia. And next to him in the cell was a leader in the Aryan Brotherhood. They call him Jelly Roll, the leader of Aryan Brotherhood. Imam Jamil did dawah to him, and he took shahada.
Mm.
He took shahada. A leader in the Aryan Brotherhood took shahada. Then when he was taken to a prison in Arizona, he was out on the yard in general population. And there were these Latino brothers who were surrounding him, talking to him and so on and so forth. After it was time for Imam Jamil to go back, all of them to go back in their cell. Now the warden was out there on the yard checking it out. Mm. After it was time to go back in, the Latino brothers went past the warden and asked the warden if he could get some Qurans in. Mm. Okay, and then they went. And then when Imam Jamil walked by the warden said to him, this is why we don't want you talking. That's what he told him.
Can't put you nowhere. We can't put
can't put you nowhere. This is why we don't want you talking. And so then the thing now is, put a gag order on him. Don't let this man. I mean, you can talk to serial killers. You can interview serial killers. They'll let you interview serial killers.
Right.
But you're not allowed to talk to Imam Jamil. Not allowed to talk to him because of the insight that he would give. And then Harry Edwards said something in a new book on Imam Jamil that was really, really on point. And we have to really watch out for this. I want to share it with you real quick if I can. He says, he talked about how they'll isolate our leaders. They'll isolate our leaders to the point to where, now check out what he says. And over a period of time, he was talking about with respect to Imam Jamil too, in particular. And over a period of time, a person can become so isolated, so insulated, so encapsulated that they actually lose contact with the linguistic currency of the current era. They lose contact with the linguistic currency of the current era, right? He goes on. He says they can't even speak to people of the generation of the Gen generation or the X generation or the boomerang generation or whatever. They want to call the current group of young or whatever, or they want to call the current group of young and up-and-coming activists. They lose contact with the people. They lose access to the linguistic currency necessary to communicate with them. And that's the hope of the system. That's what total isolation can do, where they control your reading materials, what you can listen to on the radio or watch on television. They control who can send you letters. They control letters you can send out. And the next thing you know, somebody who has been isolated has lost touch and contact with the broader masses of people who they would influence and who would benefit from their wisdom and their knowledge. That's exactly what they're doing to him. Isolate him so that he isolate him so much that he loses his contact with the people, that he won't know how to talk to the people. He won't know how to talk to the current activists of people.
Turn him into an artifact.
Huh?
Turn him into an artifact.
Exactly. Now, the beauty of Islam is he's coming out of the Quran.
Right.
He's coming out of the Sunnah. He's coming out of revolution by the book. As long as we stick to those, we're good. As long as we stick to those, we're good. He would not lose his linguistic currency as long as, of course, as long as him and us, we stick to the Quran. We stick to the Sunnah. We stick to the Sirah, right? We stick to the books, right? That he won't lose that linguistic currency. Allah is God.
So Amir, we're almost towards the end, and we want to update our listeners, viewers, use this platform to inform people about these rallies that are coming up in to free the rap, to free Imam Jamil.
Yes.
In Atlanta, there is a rally going on. There's something happening in the West Coast in Oakland. Would you like to inform people so we could use this space to let them know? Inshallah.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Excuse me, man, my cat. Get out. There is a national rally to free Imam Jamil. Some of the youth, these beautiful youth who've gotten involved in this, have taken the effort to a whole nother level. Them, as well as Brother Kyrie, his son, have taken to a whole nother level. And so on October 4th, which is Imam Jamil's birthday, he'll be 77 years old, inshallah. And they're saying that we want him out before his next birthday, right? So they're having a national rally in Atlanta to support his release and support for him having a new trial. Now, we were already going to do a program on Imam Jamil already. Yes. And then we heard about this whole thing on the national rally, October 4th, so on and so forth. So what we decided to do was to, as a show of unity and solidarity, that we have something out here for him on that same day, right? So our October 4th, from 12 to 3 at Little Bobby Hutton Park, Defirmary Park in West Oakland. Inshallah, we're going to be having a program. There'll be talks, there'll be updates on this trial, there'll be spoken word, so on and so forth. We're asking people, you know, bring a blanket, bring your rug, bring your mask, you know what I'm saying, and bring a little snack, so on and so forth. We like doing like we like having rally type picnics, you know. And so inshallah, that's going to be on Sunday, West Oakland, Defirmary Park, inshallah, from 12 noon to 3. And then the national rally in Atlanta, same day, October 4th, from 3 o'clock to 5, inshallah. And so we're asking people to come out, show support. We'll give you ways of how to participate in the effort to free Imam Jamil, inshallah. You know, we can't let what one of these crackers said after he was convicted. He said something to the effect that he will die in prison, long forgotten. You know what I'm saying? And so when he said that, when the man was convicted, we took that as a personal challenge, many of us. You know what I'm saying? And so we have to make sure that these people like this Imam Jamil is a historical figure. And we have to preserve to the best of our abilities these historical figures and learn from them as much as we can. Learn as much as we can from them, inshallah. So we're asking you to come out. We're going to try to get more copies. We're working on getting more copies of Revolution by the Book. So we can form some book clubs on that book, inshallah. We go over it every once in a while at the center, so on and so forth. And so inshallah, we're asking folks to come out if they can. If you can get to Atlanta, get to Atlanta.
Yes, inshallah.
If you can get to Atlanta, if you're able to get to Atlanta, get to Atlanta.
If you might be able to, if you got like half the money for the ticket, raise the rest of the money.
Yeah.
And flood Atlanta, because they really want everyone to flood Atlanta.
Yes.
However, we know that some of us are not going to be able to make it. Like me, myself personally, I'm working full time. I have to stay here.
Right.
So those of us who have to stay here, we don't want to just sit around. So we're going to be doing something in Oakland, inshallah.
Right, inshallah. So Jazakallah khair, brothers. Jazakallah khair for this opportunity to get this word out.
Thank you so much, Brother Amir. And thanks to our listeners. Hannibal, you might want to add something. I'll just add one quick thing, and you can add something. I just wanted to remind our listeners and others that we thank you very much for your contributions in terms of our fundraiser, which is for two organizations. It's for Milestones as well as Black Dawah Network. And we would like to push that again. So if you see that fundraiser link, please do share with folks you know. And we would like to reach our goal. And once we have that, we can do more programming. And this is the only way an independent platform like ours could work. We don't really have big institutional support or anything like that. So we would really like to encourage you to support us, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Next week, we are going to do a question and answer thing. We received a lot of questions through email, and we decided that next weekend, on Saturday at the same time, when we come back here, we're going to try to answer a lot of those questions. And we would like to encourage you between now and next Friday to send us as many questions as you like. So, and we want to take the time, actually, instead of giving impulsive quick answers, we want to think about those questions and give proper answers. So it's going to be definitely going to be me and Hannibal. And if Abdurrahman is able, he's going to join, maybe others, inshallah. So Hannibal, you want to end it off?
Yeah, so I just want to remind people to study. I want to remind people to study. You know, the main point of this series was to stimulate for people the interest and the thirst for more knowledge on these subjects. So we wanted to highlight some things that maybe little known history or maybe just not discussed as much. And that's the real point. And hopefully people would see the value in that and find some kind of spark to take their own studies in these subjects further. When we look around at the movements around us that comprise the continuation of the Black liberation struggle, you know, my humble opinion is that we're looking at a lot of sort of repeating the same mistakes, and you know, skipping over obvious, proven, effective, and successful wisdom from our predecessors. And so, you know, it's important for us to learn from the strengths and weaknesses of the past, and for us to not be falling into the same traps and tricks that got our elders. So inshallah, there's that. And yeah, like please think about questions, think about things we may not have covered, and or things that you know we didn't cover deep enough. And please get us some questions, because we want to be responsive to, you know, what people are getting from this, and we want to help people take it all further a bit, inshallah.
Inshallah. Alhamdulillah.
The question here, Jazakallah khair, Amir. So
Well, brother.
I know you have to go somewhere, so we want to thank you again. So but there's a question that I think I can answer that very quickly, which is a sister asked the names of the thinkers who influenced the Dar, and it says Maududi, and the other name was Said Qutb.
Yes,
I think you mentioned
yes.
Said Qutb. So
Yes.
our journal is named after Said Qutb's significant and most important work, in many ways, milestones, the text.
Yes.
So, sister, yeah, pick up that book. Pick up Said Qutb's In the Shade of the Quran, which is his whole series of his commentary and tafsir on the Quran. Maulana Maududi also has a tafsir set, which is very influential for us when we actually organized and after the Trayvon protests and got together. Those were the tafsirs that really influenced us as folks in the struggle.
Can I, Brother Amir, can I ask you one last question? Sorry to keep holding you up. You know, since we got you on here, you're like,
it's cool. It's okay. It's okay. No problem. No problem at all.
So we had a few people asking for references so that they could study further on things like the Dar. I'm not quite as familiar on the Dar and some of that history, and maybe, I mean, just anything relevant to that period that you were talking about, and any, you know, articles or books or documentaries or anything that people can familiarize themselves more with that stuff.
Try to there haven't been too many books that came out on the Dar. There was one like pamphlet that came out, but I'll have to get the name of that pamphlet. It's like a little pamphlet that came out. I'll get that to you, inshallah, and then you can relate it to the brothers and sisters who call them. But yeah, but not too much on the Dar, not too much Dar just yet.
I just like to add for the listeners that we are in fact working on a syllabus from Milestones on this entire series. So we did send out some materials, but those are really just selections, very small selections to have the conversation going. This was an experiment for us actually to begin to have this syllabus on the successors of Malcolm X. We do have a few other exciting new webinars coming up as we wrap up this particular series. This is not the end of this particular series either, but we're almost going towards the end. And after that, we have some exciting news for you, and we're going to update you about that, both at the level of providing more webinars on political struggle, as well as classical Islamic studies. So we are having some stuff that we're in the works, and we're going to share, and I'll talk to the Amir. We'll meet with the Amir also to collect all the texts and videos and films, everything that we can put together into a syllabus that's much more comprehensive. And inshallah, we're going to continue our conversations.
And just a little hint of something that's in the works. I did hear mention of a program on Tajweed.
Yes. So program on Quran recitation.
So there are some Quran teachers that are in conversation about providing something beneficial to the community, inshallah. And so, you know, those of you who are interested in more stuff along that lines, we're definitely working on it, and we're hoping to get it out to you guys soon, inshallah.
Yeah, and going back to what the Amir was talking earlier, we don't want to separate classical training from political struggle. We want to always encourage both. So we don't want folks who are into militancy and struggle to forget also our moral teachings and our recitations and everything that we want to be able to do to perfect our worship, inshallah. So having said that, that's it for today, inshallah. Thank you, Brother Amir, again. Jazakallah.
Alhamdulillah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.